Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Myriam Boudreau, and I'm on the board of the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the Ottawa branch office is located is traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on designing self-directed exercise programs from the University of Ottawa. We are very proud of our work with the University of Ottawa and its research to help seniors. And we are very grateful that so many of you attend these webinars and sign up to participate in the University of Ottawa research studies as well. I'm going to say this one in French, so important. Nous sommes également très fiers qu'un si grand nombre d'entre vous s'inscrivent pour participer aux études de recherche de l'Université d'Ottawa. I want to give a special welcome to anybody here who is not yet a member of the association. We truly hope that these webinars will inspire you to join. I also want to remind our members about our annual MEGRA recruitment drive. So until December 31st, every time you successfully recruit a new member, you will receive a ballot to win one of our 14 great prizes, including a $10,000 cash grand prize courtesy of Johnson Insurance. All members who successfully recruit a new member will also receive a $5 gift card. Please note that we are recording today's webinar, and after it is over, Erin Higgins from our office will send you an email explaining how to access the recording and the presentation slides. She will also send you information on the MEGA recruitment drive and how to join the association or give a membership, and Christmas is coming, that would be a great idea. Veuillez noter que le webinaire sera présenté en anglais aujourd'hui, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. Just type your question into the chat box at any point, and I will read the questions out loud to our presenters. Now it is my privilege and my pleasure to introduce our University of Ottawa speakers. Today we will be hearing from Emily Tesla, PhD student at the Human and Environmental Physiology Research Unit, Morgan McManus, who holds a BSc in Human Kinetics and is working on his master's degree at the research unit, and Dr. Glenn Kenny, professor of exercise physiology and director of the research unit. Over to you.
Thank you. All right. So I guess, Erin, you'll send me over. Perfect. So thank you very much. Yes, welcome everybody. It's pretty exciting to be here today to speak to you. And I think what you'll find today is a good presentation to get you back on track, especially after what we've experienced with COVID-19, which has really isolated us and essentially reduced, for many of you, has caused us to reduce our level of physical activity. So we'll get started without further delays. So let me share that screen with you. Hopefully what you should be seeing in a second is the presentation, and you should see the full screen at this stage. So moving forward today, again, what we're going to be taking a look at is we're going to have start off with basically talking to you about what happens as we age in terms of our physiological function, because that's important, because at the end of the day, we need to understand why exercise is beneficial. To do that, we need to see what's happening. Obviously, the benefits of exercise in reversing some of these age-related changes, and I'll be talking about that, and I'll be followed by Emily, who will then talk about the principles of goal setting and techniques and self-assessment methods, and Morgan will finish off with the part 2 section, which is the exercise physical activity guidelines. Really, what kind of training should you focus on, how to do it in terms of aerobic training, resistance training, and flexibility training. So moving forward, I think in case you forget who we are, you'll get to see this presentation. We'll have it hopefully posted, and you can see our beautiful faces at the end. So just to give you a bit of an overview for many of you, and I'm sure maybe COVID has caused you to essentially reduce your level of physical activity, but I think what we need to understand is that as we age, essentially what we're seeing is that the body's experiencing some pretty dramatic changes as we go through our span. Essentially, one of the key changes that we see, and hopefully you'll be able to see, and if I can get my little marker here going, no, I can't, but hopefully you can see my cursor over here. What we see is changes in our cardiovascular function, which is really the important component of really getting that blood to the muscle, the working muscle, because again, you need to provide that oxygen nutrient. And to help that along is our lungs. And essentially they take in that oxygen and we transfer that oxygen nutrient to the muscle, which allows us to do that physical work that we do, whether it's, doing gardening or going for that walk. So we see that there's a deterioration as we get older. And we also see it when we talk about how, when we look at the quality of the muscle essentially, as we get older, there's a loss of muscle. And essentially that results in what we see here, a reduce in your ability to essentially power the activities that you want to do. For example, going up the stairs with a bag of groceries, it can be more difficult. In terms of a cardiorespiratory fitness, that just means doing everyday activities and being less fatigued. So very important changes. Now, along with these age-related deteriorations in basic functions, you're going to see that as well, there are age-associated disease that comes along. And this is prevalent when we become more inactive and we see chronic health conditions rise. Ultimately, all of these lead to what we see as a reduction in exercise performance. But don't despair, because we know that exercise training can reverse many of these age-related changes. So importantly, what we have to realize is that we can change the course of these changes. So let's take a look at the next slide over here. And let's just briefly go over what's happening in terms of our body composition, our height, weight. Well, I used to call my dad the incredible shrinking machine. And he used to say it was because he was a pilot and all that G-force was causing him to compress. But anyways, I remember towards in his early 80s that he was essentially getting so short. I thought, what's happening with you? But that's just a normal trend, that essentially because our spines are compressing and our posture has changed, we'll see height differences. But perhaps more importantly, as we take a look, there's weight gains in the middle age, and we sort of peak in the middle age, but we start to see that weight change. I want to focus on that because it's important. What we're seeing is as we get older, if you look at the right graph, what you're seeing here is that change in lean body mass. Now, why is that important? Remember when I talked about the first slide, I said that muscle requires that oxygen nutrient, but we have less of it. We have less capacity to do work. We have less ability to process oxygen and be able to do the exercises, whether it be aerobic activity or strength training, the kind of activities that we need to just basically do the basic things around the house, whether it be grocery shopping or going for a nice leisurely walk, whatever. So what do we know? Well, exercise training can certainly change body composition from the point that essentially what we're going to see is a reduced weight gain, reduce that percent body fat, and we're going to benefit by seeing an increase in lean body mass. And that is, again, important for building good cardiorespiratory fitness and as well in building strength. Now, this comes hand in hand with the fact that when you are going to be exercising, good diet is pivotal to this process as well. All right, so let's just talk quickly about strength and why that's important. Well, basic functions that you do every day and you don't think about it, going from stepping up a series of stairs, or for example, going from sit to stand, and we take that for granted that it's easy, but essentially that requires good strength. And what we do know is that we see, if you look at the top right graph, we see this, oops, I have to go back here. What happened? Sorry about that. What we do see essentially is that there's a gradual reduction in our strength. And if you were active at a very young age, and this is what I always tell my students, is that number one, you're in your mid-20s, take advantage, maintain. And if you're active at a very young age, that rate of decline will be much less over time. So that's very important. But again, when you are training, you can still improve, despite the fact that you may have been sedentary. You see that red line down over here. You can shift that upwards, even at the age of 60, even at the age of 70. So there's no time better than today to get active, and we can increase that strength dramatically. Same with aerobic fitness. Essentially, aerobic fitness, unfortunately, goes down very rapidly. Let's put that into context. When you see these percent changes, pretty dramatic. So what does that mean? Perhaps you remember when you were younger, you were running on a treadmill, 7.5 miles an hour, 4% grade, 5% grade, showing off to your colleagues. Now today, you're probably, maybe walking fast on a treadmill, same grade, but you're struggling. That's not unusual. As we get older, it becomes more difficult. And again, it comes back to the body's ability to use that oxygen, deliver that oxygen, and consume that oxygen. And part of the problem is, again, our heart isn't pumping as much. So we can't get as much blood flow to that working muscle. And so healthy heart is important to be able to have a good cardiorespiratory fitness. Just to finish off, my last slide for you for this morning is to show to you again that when we think about fitness, and again, we can reverse that no matter what your age is. We can essentially improve that. And we want to improve it because there's a certain level at which reduced fitness can have a negative effect on your ability to live independent living. So what's important here is that essentially, while you may have been sedentary most of your life, you can still induce an increase through physical activity. Now, at this stage, I'll let Emily take over, and I want to finish off by saying one thing. No matter when you're going to get involved in physical activity, always take the opportunity to speak with your physician to make sure you don't have any underlying health conditions that may limit your ability to be active. All right? Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Should be able to see my slide section now. So thank you again as well for allowing us to speak with you today. I'm Emily, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the benefits of exercise and then transition into some concepts of goal setting. So Dr. Kenny has just presented to us a wealth of evidence about those physiological changes that can happen with our age development, but really he's made the case that exercise and physical activity can be a massive part of both prevention and the management of chronic disease, and that preservation of physical function and mobility. But despite all of these known benefits, unfortunately, less than 30% of older adults are actually meeting the recommended guidelines. And so what our hope is today is that throughout the next two sections on goal setting and then principles of training, that you're perhaps able to get a little bit of a toolbox of ideas and concepts that you can incorporate into your own life to foster some further engagement in physical activity. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific benefits that you could have, because as we transition into goal setting, I'd like everyone to have an idea of some of the areas in which they would like to see personal improvement. So we're going to talk about a couple of the different ones and see if something resonates with you. So first off, circling back to that concept of independent living. So the ability to do your own grocery shopping, lugging grocery bags up and down stairs, perhaps, the ability to dress, which requires a lot of shoulder mobility. All of those functions can have a massive impact if we incorporate physical activity prior to deficits occurring, or to help us move back away from any deficits we already have. There's also a huge benefit for the risk of falling being reduced. So if you're someone that likes to go walking outside, I know today especially was starting to get a little bit slippery out there with the nice little layer of ice. So this is going to help with our fall reduction. Coronary heart disease, certain types of cancer, the management and prevention of diabetes, those are going to be reduced if we incorporate a greater level of physical activity. If you're somebody that has hypertension or is on the cusp of having some blood pressure concerns, physical activity can help reduce and manage those risks as well. Stamina and strength improvements are a huge benefit we can get from exercise. So if you're someone that's living with a chronic or a disabling condition, this can help improve your condition and help reduce risk of progression as well. Moving into the cold, long winter days as well, we know some people might experience seasonal affective disorder or may have some changes to their mood happen with these seasonal changes. And so physical activity can also help reduce anxiety and reduce depression. And then to finish us off, healthy bones, healthy muscles, healthy joints. So the whole concept of use it or lose it, or motion is lotion, really keeping our entire anatomical system in a really good state of health. And then if you're somebody that experiences some swelling or some pain from conditions such as arthritis, we can also have a lot of benefits for incorporating physical activity for those conditions. And the great thing is that when we say exercise or we say physical activity, that incorporates a massive range of activities. So that can be anything from Tai Chi and yoga to walking, playing pickleball or tennis, cycling stationary or outside, whatever type of activity you enjoy engaging in, that's actually where you're going to see the greatest benefit, because you're going to have the greatest level of compliance and commitment to it. And what's even better is the idea of intertwining those, having multiple different activities that you like engaging in, so that we get those multi-component or dual task training modalities where we're combining balance with agility, with speed and stamina, and putting it all together for a really great benefit. So now that we know some of the benefits and areas in our life that we can improve through physical activity, this is a great segue into the concept of goal setting. And the whole purpose of goal setting is to create or cast kind of long-term visions for yourself and develop that short-term motivation to achieve it. So regardless of what age we are, goal setting can be a really rewarding activity to engage in, and it's going to have a massive increase on your likelihood of success of achieving that outcome. So it's all about focusing in on our actions, concentrating our efforts, and organizing our time appropriately. And a great strategy for doing this is called SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym that stands for specific and significant, measurable and meaningful, attainable and actionable, realistic and relevant, and then timely and tangible. So I've posted a few questions in here that I'll mention, but you can reflect on perhaps after when you receive the slides as well. And so when we talk about specific, this is what is it that you actually want to achieve? Are you aiming to achieve blood pressure management? Are you aiming to achieve mobility? Are you aiming to achieve diabetes management to make sure that you don't have disease progression? And so it's all about figuring out that kind of general concept of improvement and then setting two types of goals within it. And that's product goals and process goals. So a product goal is something that's really tangible. It's usually something quantifiable. It's something like, I want to lose 10 pounds. That is the product that I want to achieve at the end of this. I want to be able to walk 5 kilometers without having to stop. Those are going to be the end game goal that we're moving towards. But in order to achieve that, we have to do different things daily or weekly to progress ourselves. And those are the process goals. So a process goal for being able to walk 5K would be that each day you do maybe 5,000 to 10,000 steps, or you do a little leg routine at home with some resistance band to build up the stamina in your lower body muscles. So those are the little goals you would set daily to move towards that product goal of the walking distance. We also want it to be measurable and meaningful. So to be able to measure something, that's going to allow us to track our success, track our progression, track our improvements. It's going to be motivating, and it's going to allow us to know that we actually achieved what we set out to. And then for it to be meaningful, this is why it's important to you. So if we're talking about mobility being a goal of yours, is it important to you because you want to be able to get up and off the floor when you're playing with a grandchild? Is it because you want to be able to dress yourself completely independently, brush your hair with full shoulder rotation? What would be meaningful about this change for you? Attainable and actionable. So this is referring to whether or not we have the resources to achieve this. So with COVID restrictions, perhaps actually getting out to a gym space or a community setting is a little bit difficult or against the rules. And so do we have the resources at home to do what we're trying to do? If we want to build up our upper body strength, we might need some little dumbbells at home. We might need some resistance bands. So making sure that you've acquired or you have access to those resources. And then reflecting on the other priorities you have in your life right now that might make this more challenging or might facilitate you doing it. So if you've got volunteer commitments or maybe familial obligations with helping with childcare, whatever it might be, looking at how those factors interplay into your life and how we can set our goals inclusive or around them. Realistic and relevant. So we always want a goal to be stretching. A goal isn't something we can achieve tomorrow. It needs to be a little ways in the future. It's going to need to challenge us to be able to get there, but we want it to be realistic in the sense that are the factors within my control to achieve that. So if you maybe have sustained an injury to your knee before, or you're recovering from hip surgery, some of the factors with that healing process aren't within your control necessarily. And so we want to perhaps not goal set to do a one-legged squat on that bad knee. We want to set something that's maybe a little bit more realistic for us at this point in time. And then lastly, timely and tangible. So a good goal has a deadline. It always has a time point that you're hoping to achieve it by. And it's not to punish yourself if you didn't by that point. That's an opportunity for reevaluation, but it allows us to have something that we're working towards and set that time limit appropriately as well. So just circling back to realistic, if maybe weight management, because for bone health and mobility, you want to work on weight management, then if we want to lose 20 pounds, to say that we want to do that by the end of December might not be very timely, since we know that only about 1 to 2 pounds a week would be healthy weight loss. So we want to reflect on whether or not those product and process goals that we're setting that are specific can be done so in the timeline that we've set for ourselves. So now we know kind of how to set up our goal. Another really great strategy that can support that is reflecting on what's called the habit loop. So we know that about 40% of all of the activities that we do each day are actually just unconscious choices in our life. They're just habits that our body has gotten into the groove of doing. And so sometimes these habits can make achieving our goals that we just set a little bit more difficult. And so we can use this loop to figure out where we can intervene so that this new habit becomes more sustainable and a part of our life that we are not as willing to let go of. So all you do is you reflect on what triggers you might have. So triggers are perhaps a certain person, a place, a time of day, a certain food you eat that makes you then feel sleepy. Whatever your trigger would be, that's going to start the cycle. We then have the actual routine take place. So this could be maybe a sedentary behavior. After you eat food, you go and you sit on the couch, or first thing in the morning, you're feeling kind of stiff, so you don't move as much and you just go and sit down for breakfast, and then you sit down for watching a show. That would be the routine. And then the reward is the benefit that's driving the behavior. So did it just feel good? Did you get some kind of psychological benefit from this habit? And so where the opportunity to intervene is knowing what those triggers are. So if we know that we tend to stay sedentary after dinner because we feel full, so that's our trigger. Our trigger is that we don't want to walk directly towards the couch and get cozy and sucked into that vortex by the TV at night. We're going to intervene at that point and instead either not allow ourselves to walk into the living room, or set up with a friend that at that time each evening you meet for a walk, or you get on a stationary bike or something you have access to at home and you intervene. You then have your new healthy routine, your new physical activity behavior, and the reward are all of those things that Dr. Kenny talked about at the beginning. The last little part I wanted to talk about in this section is tracking techniques and self-assessment. So there's all these different things that we can do, these really advanced physiological metrics that if you ever came to our lab or you go to another fitness facility, they might be able to do for you. But especially at this time of year with us being at home more, there's so many things that we can do ourselves. And this really circles back to the measurable component of SMART goal setting. So I just wanted to highlight a few of them to show how easy it is to do this at home. So body composition wise, of course, we can use our weight. We can use this as a metric if we're trying to gain weight with muscle mass, or if we're trying to lose some fat mass. We can use that as a great metric. We can just use a soft sewing measuring tape to do waist to hip ratios. So palpating near your belly button and then your hip bone and looking at the difference between the two of them. You can use things like body mass index with your height and your weight. Then for flexibility, there's so many different stretches that you can do. And again, you can use a soft measuring tape. Perhaps you put it underneath your toes and then you hold the other end with your hand and you walk your way down it and you see how far you're able to achieve at the beginning, record it, and then complete it again. You can also have someone take photos of you in certain postures of stretching, and then you can reflect on the differences between the photos. Same thing for range of motion. If you know that maybe you have some wrist pain and you want to be able to work on the mobility of your wrist, you can do the same thing. You can do different motions of flexion and extension of the wrist and take photos and record the meaningful changes that you might have there. For strength, the best way to do this would be to just do some journaling. You write down the weight. So right now you're at 5 pounds for your bicep curl. You want to get that up to 7.5. And so you can record your progressions that way, or just the ability to complete activities of daily living. If you want to be able to lift up the laundry hamper independently, you can use that as your measurement of success. Sitting to standing for balance is a great one. If that's something you're working on for fall risk reduction, being able to get up without using any aids of a walker, a cane, or the handles of the chair, working towards that goal. Cardiovascularly, we can do things like time to completion versus distance traveled. And then our last one is some biometrics. So if you've got a little blood pressure cuff at home, a heart rate monitor that you could use, those are little things that you can tie into your training that our next presenter, Morgan, is going to touch on. So I'll hand it over to him.
Great, thank you. So I'll be going through guidelines for exercise, how to push yourself, how to assess progress, and expected outcomes in aerobic exercise, resistance training, and flexibility training. But first, a quick disclaimer: always consult your physician or healthcare professional before starting or modifying your fitness program. If you experience faintness, dizziness, pain, shortness of breath, any of these at any time during exercise, you should stop immediately. So on to aerobic exercise guidelines. Generally, aerobic exercise is sustained movement rigorous enough to increase your breathing and oxygen consumption. So what we're looking for is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise, 75 minutes if it's vigorous, 150 if it's moderate, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And a combination, the full 150 over 2 to 3 times per week at least. And you can use the talk test to check if this is vigorous or moderate. So generally moderate exercise, you can carry on a conversation, whereas if you are going through vigorous exercise, then it should get a little more challenging to have a full conversation. So sentences will get short, and you might even have to take a pause for breath once in a while. So how can we push ourselves? First off, keeping a record of intensity and duration is a fantastic tool for being able to push yourself to greater heights. For steady state cardiovascular exercise, this is when your speed and intensity are relatively constant. For this kind of thing, what you could do is make a slight increase in either your intensity or pace and see how long you can go with maintaining that pace. Once your pace falls off, then you have an assessment of how far you're going. With interval training, another option, this is another option, and this is where you would have some high effort intervals and some lower effort intervals. And with this, you could either decrease the length of the lower effort interval, or you could increase the effort of the high effort interval, or even just increase the length of that interval. All of the above are different ways you can push yourself. So how do you assess the progress? With cardiovascular exercise specifically, heart rate and exercise intensity are directly correlated within a certain range, the range that you'll be using. So if you're exercising at a certain intensity and your heart rate is at your target heart rate zone, 65 to 85%. If later on that same exercise intensity only requires a lower heart rate, then you've improved in fitness. Likewise, if you're able to tolerate a higher heart rate for longer, if you're anaerobic threshold, then that's when you're also improving in fitness. That's a difficult part to sustain. So how do you find your maximal heart rate? You can use the equation 208 minus 0.7 times your age. This is just if you need a general definition of where each zone is and what you want to work on for each zone. Then you can use intensities and speeds to test these out yourself. And after the first few minutes, when your heart rate stabilizes, you can say, okay, well, this intensity that I'm working at works at this part of my target heart rate zone. Your heart rate will continue to rise over time with exercise, but that's perfectly normal. It's just you working towards using more and more sugars as the exercise continues on. So what kind of outcomes can you expect from exercising 3 or more days per week? So you can see some enhanced cardiovascular function leading to improved blood pressure regulation and greater maximal and submaximal cardiovascular capacity. This means that activities of daily life will get easier, and you should be able to handle longer and more intense activities. All right, on to resistance training guidelines. So resistance training in general is weighted movements that you use designed to increase your muscular strength or endurance over time. Ideally, you would do resistance training 2 to 3 times per week using 2 to 3 sets of 6 to 12 repetitions. Mostly consisting of 1 to 2 multi-joint exercises per muscle group. And this could be with body weights or free weights or machines, even anything to provide some resistance. And typically you would rest about 2 minutes in between sets. So what do you choose in terms of movement patterns for this kind of thing? Well, you want to stay balanced. You want to replicate movements of daily life. And you can generally break this into these 7 basic movement patterns. So squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling, bending, twisting, and walking. All of these, if you can incorporate into exercise, then you should be relatively balanced with your training routine. Generally, we start with lighter weights and higher repetitions. And over time, you could try out less repetitions and higher weights, or even more sets of the same thing. So how do you assess progress? Well, at the start, I mentioned keeping a record of your exercise is vital. So if you are tracking repetitions and sets, then you should see, as you progress, more repetitions done over time, or even changing the weight that you're working with. So that is a higher amount of weight that you're pushing and pulling. You can even see another set added on, and that's in itself a marker of progress, as your endurance lasts a little bit longer, since you're able to push things and pull things for a little bit longer. So how do you push yourself? And how do you work with sets and reps to gradually move from one thing to the next? So there's a very simple format called progressive overload that you would use to make sure you're not taking too big of a step in between things. You would start by increasing the number of repetitions you do per set at a given weight. And then once you've increased your repetitions on all of your sets to a certain point, then you can drop your repetitions down and increase your weight. This works with bodyweight training as well, but the tricky part with bodyweight training is that there's normally pretty big jumps between how much weight you're actually dealing with. So if you do a push-up from the wall, for example, and then you move to push-ups on the floor from your knees, then that's a really big change in weight. So normally you'd have to get your repetitions pretty high up from those wall push-ups first before you can drop down to push-ups from knees. All right, so what kind of outcomes can you expect? So if you're exercising only 1 day per week, you can generally see some mitigation in strength loss and muscle loss. So you won't lose strength as fast, and you won't lose muscle mass as fast. Some people can experience some strength gains and some muscle gains, but generally it's not quite enough to do per week. If you're exercising 2 or more times per week, though, you can see improved strength. This is reflected in improvements in activities of daily life. Now, with exercising, one thing to note is that you will likely experience some soreness 24 to 72 hours later. And this is just because your muscles are working really hard, and then they have to repair themselves to a point that's even stronger later on. So that soreness is a good thing. The last thing with this, Dr. Kenny mentioned earlier on, is that muscle mass is related to cardiovascular function. More muscle mass generally leads to higher aerobic performance. So on to flexibility training. So at least 2 to 3 days a week is preferred for flexibility training. Even better would be daily if you're stretching every single day. You can hold a stretch for 10 to 30 seconds and repeat the same stretch 1 to 4 times. You should avoid holding your breath or bouncing in stretches for now. And you should be stretching every major muscle group if possible. So how do you assess progress? Easiest way, like Emily mentioned, is taking pictures. You can take a picture of a range of motion that you're working on in a specific joint group. Like if your arms don't fully extend overhead, you can work on that, get a picture from the side, and then work on stretching, keep consistent, and take a picture later on so you can compare before and after you're stretching, or before and after a period of time of stretching. So what kind of outcomes can you expect? If you're stretching 4 days a week, you can generally see some improvements in range of motion, and this is generally reflected in easier activities of daily life, especially when movement is restricted enough that some of those basic movement patterns that you would do all the time are a little more challenging. All right, and onto some general tips. So for each of these, whether you're doing resistance training or flexibility training or aerobic training, you want to warm up and cool down before and after each. This is especially important for aerobic training and resistance training, as you need to bring your core temperature up and you need to get your body moving to increase joint lubrication and to get your muscles fully aware and the blood circulating to those muscles. The cool down can also help promote getting whatever substrates you've been working on out of your body or used up so that it doesn't promote soreness following the exercise. So this can help with that and can help with preventing stiffness after exercise. If you have any ongoing medical problems that change throughout exercise or throughout programming, again, consult your doctor just in case there's anything that you should be changing. And lastly, make sure to stay well hydrated. So drink water before, during, and after exercise. So putting it all together, what you ideally like to do is choose an attainable goal, then making a routine that works for you. So if it means exercising with friends, or if it means setting it as part of a daily habit, whatever you can do to make that happen. And if there's any classes where you're breathing heavy, or any lessons, or if you're a part of any sports leagues, whenever you're breathing heavy, that also contributes to that aerobic exercise portion. So if you are just going to the gym, then you can actually accomplish everything all at once. You could start off by warming up, going through resistance training, then aerobic exercise and a cool down after that, and end it all off with stretching. And you've hit every form of exercise in one set. So some general tips. Use goal setting to keep you motivated. Just for general tips, and on to the next slide, sorry. Use goal setting to keep you motivated. So work on your weak spots. If your cardio is lacking, or if you specifically need to build some more strength, more than your cardio or your flexibility, then prioritize that. Start slowly, even 10 minutes is good. Everything contributes to something, and everything or anything is better than nothing. And then work with small changes. So if you're resistance training, don't suddenly change your weight and the number of sets and the number of repetitions all at once. Make one change at a time and see how it works for you. For aerobic training, same kind of thing. Change something about intensity, or change the kind of aerobic training you're doing, but make sure whatever change happens, it's a small enough change that you can see how it works for you. Try to work with non-sequential days just to start off, so you can assess how well you recover. And ideally start with something low impact. So if you're new to cardiovascular activity, for example, and you jump right into going for runs outside, then you might see a little bit more joint pain in relation to if you had started with biking, for example. So some key takeaways from this. Exercise combats aging and disease. It improves longevity and quality of life. So it's a fantastic tool within your arsenal. Work with what motivates you and try to make it a habit. Start slowly and listen to your body. Make sure to test your limits and push yourself once in a while to keep yourself progressing. And every little bit of exercise counts. Anything is better than nothing.
All right, thanks, Morgan. If I'll switch into this now, if you can get off your screen, and I just want to touch on a few things, if I could, just to finish off. So I'm just going to essentially share my screen here in 1 second. So sharing screens. So hopefully everybody will see this in a short, brief second. So just on a few points that Morgan indicated, I just want people to realize that training is a variable response. And essentially when you go out there today, and many of you may have a day in which you just don't feel well. You just say, listen, I'm just not going to go train. That's a decision that obviously you need to make. But one of the best things that you can do is, even on those off days, don't expect to accomplish much. Or essentially when you go out there, you may see, geez, my performance is just not where it should have been. That's absolutely fine. Just getting that brain, the brain to be active, and your muscles and your system to be active is extremely important in promoting improvements. People always think that you have to be at your peak to see improvements. Absolutely wrong. Anytime that you can activate and stimulate the body, you are essentially, even when your mood level is low, you're going to see that in fact it's going to be you're going to get some huge benefits out of it. And that's one thing I teach people. It's not always about looking for the successes in terms of seeing marked improvements. And listen, on today, I'm doing an extra 10 pounds. You may actually have a deficit of 40 pounds. That's absolutely fine. Expect that. Our bodies are quite variable in how we respond day to day. So don't expect to turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger overnight. So do it progressively and understand that your body will go through some important cycles. And the one thing as well, in this period of isolation with COVID-19, accept the fact that there are going to be times where your mood level is just going to be down. And this is exercise, a great tool in which to give and elevate your mood, because again, that physical activity is essentially going to provide that pleasure and that excitement associated with just stimulating the central nervous system. And that's very important. You're going to see that overall your vitality, your enthusiasm is going to improve. So exercise is important for a number of reasons. And in terms of muscle soreness, just understand that muscle soreness, again, there's a separation between, what we consider pain. And there used to be a slogan way back when we had the Olympic Games in Spain, used to be no pain, no gain. That's completely false. Don't think about pushing yourself to the point where essentially you may cause muscle damage or position yourself in a way that you might, cause damage to one of your joints. Most importantly is always listen to your body, and the body tells you a lot. The one thing to do, there's nothing wrong with down regulating the intensity and just enjoying the moment and doing the exercise. So always think about the importance of just getting the job done and just enjoying the moment. So that essentially you get the benefit. Hydration. Why is that important? Go back to what we talked about at the start of the session. Remember the heart. The heart is at the forefront of this, folks, because at the end of the day, it's got to supply the oxygen nutrient to that muscle. By strengthening that heart, essentially, number one, will improve the oxygen delivery. But more importantly, when you exercise, you're going to see that you're going to dehydrate because essentially you're sweating. As you sweat, your blood volume decreases. Therefore, the heart has to work harder just to supply that blood flow to the muscles, while also increasing blood flow to the skin to get rid of that heat. So hydration, very important. So if you are going to be active, make sure the night before or that morning of, that you drink water and that essentially you maintain that best opportunity, because having a good base to start off with, meaning that your heart has a good blood volume, is going to be beneficial to you. So listen, last slide, as you see over here in terms of participating in our research, obviously we've benefited greatly from members like yourself who have, through your generosity, have been participating in our work, and we love to give back. And if you ever are interested in participating in our studies, we are essentially doing numerous studies, again, looking at exercise and heat exposure. And if you're ever interested in getting a fitness assessment, you can reach out to us, and you have our contacts, which will be provided. And essentially you can email me or email the team, and we'll get you scheduled, and we'll go through a fitness assessment and give you some advice on how best to design a program. There's one thing most important about a fitness program is there's some generalizability, but also there's individualization, which means that we have to take a look at who you are, what your needs are, and what your end goals are so that you can be successful. So if you have any questions, we're ready to take them. Thank you.